This video is sponsored by Raycon, who are offering up to 20% off site-wide, including on their all-new Essential Open earbuds. These have become a central part of my exercise routine. They're sleek, smart, and way more comfortable than your average earbuds. They actually make exercise enjoyable, which isn't easy. Get 20% off your order when you visit buyraycon.com/skillupopen. Scan the QR code on screen or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Alright, I'm going to talk about why Highguard isn't great and definitely should not have been launched into 1.0 in its current form, and definitely should not have had this level of marketing attached to it. But before I do that, I really want to set up the context for this video. Imagine if, all of a sudden, a little studio working in secret revealed themselves and shadow dropped a new PvP shooter. They released it as an invite-only closed beta, and they were really clear that the game is at the start of a long journey, and they want to work with the community to refine the vision, and they didn't overhype it. They just put out a thing with a plan to work on it until it was truly ready to launch. Had Highguard launched in that way, I suspect it would have made a fairly tepid but ultimately a fairly optimistic reception, because there's some cool ideas here, and most people understand that building a game like this takes time and testing and community feedback, etc. Hell, I don't think Valve has even properly announced Deadlock yet, and that thing's been in closed beta for like 2 years and counting. Had Highguard gone down this path, it wouldn't have had the big day one player count it achieved, but it would have had more goodwill, and it would have set expectations at the right level, and most importantly, it would have allowed the game to be refined to the point where it was ready to be shown to an audience of 100 million people, because that is the sort of audience that Jeff Keighley's The Game Awards now draws. I say all of this because I've seen the negative reception towards Highguard, and I think that a lot of it is fair in the sense that this game runs like shit, and its balance is busted, and the core loop is not there yet, and overall it clearly needs a huge amount of work to get it to where it needs to be. But obviously, a lot of that negative reception is amplified by the fact that despite his best intentions, Jeff did not do this game any favors by putting it in that one more thing slot, and his cheeky tweets this past week haven't helped. No one is offering you any apologies, Jeff, my man. Highguard is textbook overhyped, the likes of which we haven't seen for a while, since the industry has kind of learned this lesson a while back, and it's also been released with the wrong label on it. Had it been soft launched into closed beta with some very modest marketing, I think everyone would have a much more measured take on what Highguard actually is. And what is it? Well, not much right now, to be honest, but it could be something one day. There are some parts of it that I like, there's some novel ideas here, but the truth is, and this is just me making a prediction, I think the future of Highguard is less about it becoming a better version of what it is now, and more about taking its elements and remixing them to deliver something different. If you haven't played it yet, you'd be like, what the fuck does that mean? But if you have played it, then you'll immediately be like, yep, cool, I get you, totally. This game only works in fits and starts, and in all the boring downtime in between, you find yourself daydreaming about how fun it would be if there were more players on the map, some PvE enemies, some vehicles to ride, more ways to fortify and defend your base, more frames per second, the list goes on. So look, bottom line, Highguard isn't good right now, and Wildlight Entertainment made a pretty grievous error in pushing this thing out in the way they did, because they not only overhyped it, but they also skipped over a critical community feedback phase that could have allowed them to solve all of the problems that this initial wave of coverage is going to be fixated on. I'm not a Highguard doomer in the sense that you can never predict how these things are going to go in the long term, and I'd honestly love for this game to find an audience and for this studio to be successful, but that feels like it is a long way off. This is not about minor tweaks, it's about some real root and branch redesign of this experience, and I just hope the studio has enough runway to deliver that, and that players are willing to give the game a second chance when the time comes. Okay, so let's knock over performance first. It's terrible. I'm playing on an RTX 5090, running at 4K resolution, DLSS on, low settings, resolution scaling set to like 50% or some shit, and I'm struggling to crack 60 FPS when I'm in the siege phase of the game, which is basically the most important part. By the way, if I jack it to high settings, the frame rate stays largely the same, so clearly there are some fairly profound optimization issues going on here. I would say that this level of performance negatively impacts my experience to the point where I don't want to play the game. Sometimes shitty performance hurts an experience, but you can live with it. In a tactical 3v3 PvP shooter, nah, you need this shit to run properly, otherwise it just feels like you're wasting your time. The PC options menu is also extremely garbage for a tactical shooter released in 2026. Like, you really need to give people a lot of options for games like this so that a critical mass of people on low-end hardware can achieve the frame rates necessary for competitive play. But this handful of options doesn't allow you to tweak nearly enough, and by the way, you can't even select the type of DLSS you're applying, like balanced or performance or quality or whatever. It's just DLSS on or off, That's it. And the resolution scaling bar doesn't even work because you can't manually set it to whatever you like. You can move the bar, but you can't save the setting. When you try and then reopen the menu, it just goes straight back to where it was before. So if I'm getting this level of performance on a 5090, then heaven help people running on 20 series GPUs or whatever. The game is sitting at a mostly negative rating on Steam, and a lot of those are review bombs, sure, but a lot of them, and I mean a lot of them, are calling out performance. For a game that looks this simple and for a genre that demands high, well-paced frame rates, this sort of performance is pretty surprising and honestly a bit of a deal breaker. On the point of visuals, I don't know, man, I'll put it this way. What if Immortals of Avium had a multiplayer mode? That sounds super harsh, so I'll remind you that I actually recommended Immortals of Avium. I like that game, but there's no denying that there was something generic about its rendition of a fantasy world. Too clean, too gilded, too flat, just lacking that stylistic hook that makes your brain go, huh, never seen that before. Highguard's characters all embody that vibe, I think. They all look okay, but their designs don't really communicate anything about their playstyles. Like, did you know that this guy, Atticus, throws lightning spears? And this guy, Kai, is an ice mage who can transform into a giant frost golem thingy. And this guy, Slade, can shoot lava from his hands. Do they look like they can do that? This guy looks like he should be some sword-wielding melee duelist. This dude looks like he should be controlling the lightning and using it to zoom around the battlefield like the Team Fortress Scout or whatever, and this dude looks like he should be throwing out Shoryukens in Street Fighter 6. The world design is equally bland, but I actually think that's more a function of the way these spaces are designed than their art. But in order to talk about that, we first need to understand what this game is and how it works, so let's talk about that next, I guess. Okay, so what is Highguard? So the short answer is, imagine the visuals and class design of Valorant crossed with the time to kill and loot progression of a battle royale game, crossed with the bomb planting and destruction of Rainbow Six Siege. That's Highguard, sort of. The round starts by selecting your Warden. There are only a handful to choose from at this point, but surely more will arrive in future seasons. You then choose your home base, and there are a couple to choose from, and they each have their own distinct layouts and strengths and weaknesses. I'm not sure why this is selectable at this point, since it feels like everyone just chooses the recommended option when it appears. Maybe some metagame stuff emerges later on where it's clear that certain characters excel at defending certain layouts. I don't know. For now though, it feels a bit superfluous, and I'd be just as happy to have these bases randomized. The game begins with a defense phase. Here you're running around your base reinforcing walls so they're harder to demolish. You want to do this around your generators and your central crystal thingy, since enemy planting bombs on these things is how you lose the game. This is obviously very similar to the setup phase in Rainbow Six Siege, only it's nowhere near as meaningful because enemies have so many ways to crack open these reinforcements, things like character abilities and rocket launchers and sledgehammers and other explosives. Siege fortifications work because characters have fewer means of breaching them, and breaking them typically only breaks a small space rather than blowing out an entire fucking wall. It's an inelegant comparison because Siege and Highguard are so different, so I'll just summarize it this way. In Siege, the setup phase feels necessary and urgent and important, and you really think about where and what you reinforce. Here in Highguard, you're like, yeah, that'll do, I guess. And then you just wait for the enemy to eventually demolish that wall in the siege phase anyway. The first defense phase goes for a minute, after which time you're loosed upon the rest of the map for the gear up phase. This is when things really start to go off the rails. Highguard's maps are pretty big, like so big that you almost never encounter an enemy player in the gear up phase, so big that you're actually best off splitting your squad of 3 and going in 3 separate directions because there's so much ground to cover, and because you're so unlikely to encounter an enemy, and because even if you do die in this phase, you don't really lose anything other than a bit of armor, which is easy to instantly replace. So in this phase, you're doing 2 things. You're looting blue chests for armor and trinkets that give you boosts like faster ability recharge time or whatever, and red chests that give you weapons. The thing is though, gear quality is throttled based on which round you're on. So during the first round of play, before any siege has commenced, you're only going to find blue items. When a siege ends and the map resets, purple items will then begin to appear, and after another round you'll start getting high tier orange items which can have unique perks on them that make them really overpowered depending on the weapon type, but we won't get into weapon balance too much in this video. So the first gear up phase just sees you collecting a blue version of the grey gun you chose to start with, and the next phase sees you collecting the purple version of it. That's it. Oh, actually, that's not it. You're also mining for some reason. You're doing this quick time event over and over to mine crystal so you can buy things from the vendor, and the vendor looks like Captain Price for some reason. Most of the time, though, you don't really need to talk to this guy because you get so much loot from the chests because there's so many chests and no enemies are contesting them. So here's a hot take. You could just remove this phase from the game completely and nothing of value would be lost right now. I'm not proposing that because I think you could add some things to this phase to make it good, but right now it adds nothing. It's just boring padding. Imagine though if this phase had some PvE enemies to farm. That way you could shoot stuff for currency rather than just do a boring ass minigame. Maybe there could be some boss encounters in the middle of the map that drop some high level loot and that actually force some actual confrontation between teams. Maybe there's a vehicle you want to fight over that could give you an advantage in the siege or defense phase. Maybe a lot of things. Maybe literally anything other than running around for 2 minutes doing basically nothing. This is a really urgent need. I think this phase is dreadful. After that, the shield breaker begins to spawn. This is essentially a flag that you need to capture and bring to the enemy base, and if you do that, you initiate a siege on their base. There's a 1 minute timer before this appears, which is too long, and it should be 30 seconds, and then it appears, someone grabs it, and it's on like Donkey Kong. The flag fight is actually cool, and it's here, a full 4 minutes into the round, that we actually begin shooting things. I feel like capture the flag is timeless, and it's kind of cool to see this rendition of it here, with the ability to mount up instantly and flee or give chase. It immediately took me back to the classic days of Halo, riding in a warthog or in a ghost. It's just cool, and honestly, it's like one of the few parts of Highguard that you look at and go, okay, this part's working, no notes. After one team dunks the shield breaker into the enemy base, this Cronos battering ram appears. This is where things start to suck again because one team sits on one side of the force field waiting to get in, and the other team should be doing some last minute defensive stuff, but they can't because there's nothing else to do. You can't like activate defensive turrets or golems or set traps or permanently reinforce a wall so it can never be destroyed or anything. You just stand there watching the other team while they watch you back. It's like that Darth Maul Qui-Gon Jinn scene, only the force field is up for way longer. Anyway, eventually the shield comes down and then it's a battle to detonate either 2 generators or 1 central crystal thingy. But similar to the open world, the bases just feel way too big given that there's only 3 people on each team. Put it this way, 3 people have to defend 3 locations. It's just so easy for the enemy to flank around and set up a cheeky bomb because there's so much space for them to operate in, and also because it's really easy to punch extra holes in the dome given how readily available these dome splitter items are, and how easy it is to punch holes in walls given everything I described earlier. There's also a real homogeneity to how these bomb locations are set up. Like the base layouts are always different, but the generators and crystals are always inside, surrounded by walls and roofs. This naturally forces a big focus on close quarter combat weapons in that phase, and it renders a number of ultimates completely useless since they rely on being outside and having space to operate in. As such, this phase feels very similar from one round to the next because you can never really apply different tactics to get the bomb planted. It always has to be explode the walls, rush the site, hide in a nearby corner with a shotgun or SMG out, and then just hope for the best. To its credit, the flow of these rounds is actually quite clever since a really strong team can effectively steamroll the match, riding their momentum to a quick win, whereas a good defense will see the bases reset so that the other team has a chance to claw their way back, and that could mean that games can go for as little as like 5 minutes, or they can stretch to as long as 30. That's good in the sense that these 30-minute matches can be really exciting, but it can also make the decision to play Highguard a tricky one since you don't know if the match you're about to step into is going to be one of the long ones, so you essentially need to have the next 30 minutes free every time you hit that Q button, otherwise you might have to leave early and cop a leavers penalty. And that really brings us to one of the game's biggest weaknesses, or weaknesses as I personally see it. This is trying to be a sweaty, tactical, fairly punishing game that attracts a competitive player. Matchmaking generally sucks as it's a game where team coordination is super important. There's long respawn timers and runbacks if you happen to get down in the flag chase phase. There's limited lives in the siege phase. It's all structured to be fairly sweaty, but the time to kill doesn't really align with that since it's quite long and you can't really 2v1 or 3v1 like you can in a proper competitive experience. Presently, it's a game that's very much about throughput rather than true gun skill, and that makes the whole thing feel like it's got a bit of an identity crisis. And that's just the inherent actual tension in the game's core loop. But on top of that, we can also add the sort of tension that exists in our own imagination as we play this thing. Like its visual style and its combat pacing and its map size all scream that this should be casual friendly, but it's not. Like, it's just definitely not. It's really set up to appeal to a very niche group of players who are already well serviced by other competitive games and who aren't willing to suffer the many compromises that Highguard currently suffers from. And then you can zoom out even further and start straight up wishlisting all the stuff I mentioned throughout this video. Like, imagine a loot phase that involves some PvE enemies and some PvP skirmishes. Imagine being able to earn more interesting loot rather than just always getting blue upgrades in round 1 and purple upgrades in round 2 and so on. Imagine if there were things you could do in that loot phase that would give you an advantage in the siege phase, like trebuchets for attackers or stronger fortifications for defenders. Imagine being able to do something, like anything at all, during that second defense phase, rather than just standing there waiting for the enemy to come in. Imagine being able to set traps or block off pathways. Imagine some bomb locations out in the open so that you could apply some different tactics. All that stuff sounds really cool, and you may be thinking, well, why didn't the developers just do that? Well, the truth is, everything I just described is a fundamentally different game from what this is, and this is the point I made at the start of this video. I just can't see how Highguard succeeds as Valorant plus Rainbow Six Siege with horses. I can't see a scenario where the truly competitive crowd of hardcore PvP sweats flock to this and give it the playbase necessary for it to survive. But I can kind of see how a more casual arena shooter style thing works and does attract a critical mass of players who would play this for fun, in the same way that Overwatch and Marvel Rivals attracts players owing to how immediate and accessible they are. If this was more Halo and less Valorant, I could see this working, and in fact, I'd actually be super into that package. With more players on the map and some PvE enemies and this time to kill and the whole capture the flag thing and some tower defense stuff, I think that's a pretty winning combo. I personally would be down for that. And I think there's enough here in this toolbox where Wildlight Entertainment could remix these elements to deliver that. But that's literally just me wishlisting stuff, and it's not the reality of the game in front of us right now. And maybe Wildlight go in that path, but maybe they don't. I don't know. All I know right now is that Highguard was not at all ready for the massive spotlight that was shone on it. It reminds me of Amazon's Crucible, actually. Do you remember that one? Nope, you don't. But it was a 5v5 arena shooter style thing that released way too early because Amazon wanted to seize on the opportunity presented by COVID when we're all locked in our houses. They figured that even though the game wasn't ready, the chance to grab that audience in that moment was too big to pass up. Crucible ended up paying the ultimate price, pulled back into closed beta after its Rush 1.0 release, before eventually being shuttered altogether some months later. Highguard's release is obviously very different, but the contours are similar. A chance at an audience too big to pass up, and a release before proper testing had refined the game to the point where it was ready to be presented to that audience. I do hope that Wildlight are willing to go back to the drawing board on a number of elements here, because Highguard could eventually become something fun and unique and interesting, and could do things that other games aren't doing. Right now though, it feels like a badly optimized amalgam of disparate elements stitched together without enough thought or testing, and as such I think most people can sit this one out until the future of Highguard becomes clear, whatever that future ends up being. Now that the holidays are over, it's the perfect time to upgrade your gear for the new year. If you're getting back into a fitness routine or training more consistently, audio that actually works while you move makes a huge difference, so you may be interested in these all-new Essential Open Earbuds from this video's sponsor, Raycon. The Raycon Essential Open Earbuds solves so many problems created by traditional earbuds. The biggest one for me is comfort. I don't know about you guys, but always having a piece of plastic jammed into my ear can start to feel a little uncomfortable after a while. The Essential Open Earbuds sit around and on top of your ear, and no word of a lie, sometimes I forget I'm even wearing them. The best use case though is exercise. There isn't a single pair of earbuds that stay in my ear when I'm jogging, but I don't need to worry about that with the Essential Open Earbuds because their design means they stay on no matter what I'm doing. Plus, I don't get so much sweat built up in my ear, but even if I did, the Essential Open Earbuds are IPX5 certified water resistant. Also, I play a lot of tennis, and lately I've been wearing these while I play because it lets me listen to music or a podcast while I'm hitting against a ball machine. And that is so good, I love that. The sound quality is crisp and clear, allowing me to enjoy music and podcasts while also being able to hear what's going on around me, and the battery life is excellent. 8 hours of continuous playback and a total of 36 hours of charge time with the charging case. These are what I keep in my sports bag now, or what I wear when I go out for a walk or a run. They're comfortable, reliable, flexible, and the perfect way to listen to music or podcasts while leading an active lifestyle. If you're looking for earbuds that move with you, whether you're commuting, working, or just living life, the Essential Open Earbuds are the way to go. To grab a pair for yourself, just scan the QR code on screen or visit buyraycon.com/skillupopen to get 20% off your order and up to 20% off site-wide, since Raycon has tons of other stuff worth checking out too. That special price is strictly for a limited time, so do get in quick. The QR code is right there. Otherwise, it's buyraycon.com/skillupopen for up to 20% off site-wide. Thanks Raycon for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.